Now more of the Midcoast Morning Buzz with Richard and Jim. Radio 9, WCME.
Two environmental groups have asked a federal judge to order a temporary shutdown of turbines at 4 hydroelectric dams on the Kennebec and Androscoggin Rivers, including right here in Brunswick. And that's done in order to save the migrating Atlantic salmon, or smolts as they're called. With us is Ed Friedman. He's chairman of one of the groups, Friends of Merrymeeting Bay. Ed, thank you so much for coming in.
You're welcome.
We should point out here at the outset that one of these, in fact, it's the one that prompted our interest in the story, is just a stone's throw from where we are doing this interview in Fort Andros.
Yes, indeed.
Right on the banks of the Androscoggin.
Now, Ed, the Gulf of Maine salmon, they were put on the endangered species list back in 2000, correct?
Yeah, thanks to a lawsuit that we brought then, actually. Prior to that, the salmon were listed on about 7 small rivers in Maine, but the services avoided the large rivers where the main populations were, the Kennebec, the Androscoggin, right here, and the Penobscot. And we filed a suit to expand the listing to those rivers.
Okay, so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service, they published a recovery plan after they were put on the endangered species list. But then no federally protected habitat for the fish was ever developed. Now, was that an oversight, or was it on purpose, or was it just another bureaucratic blunder?
No, there is a critical habitat developed. The problem with critical habitat is that it is limited to the current range of the fish as opposed to historic range of the fish. In the case of the Androscoggin River, the historic range of the Atlantic salmon went upstream as far as Rumford, because the Swift River that comes into the Andro there was prime spawning habitat. In the case of critical habitat, it goes up as far as Lewiston.
Okay, now walk me through this. I remember when they were developing the falls over here some years ago, and when they cleaned up the water. And if I'm not mistaken, part of that whole reclamation project was to put in a fishway. Now, why are the fishways not even mentioned in any of this controversy? Were not the fishways to prevent the salmon from going into the turbines?
The fishways help with upstream passage, which is only half of the equation. Take, the euphemism for killing a fish, actually is a term that means to harm, to wound, to kill, several other things, so it's a broad definition, delay, and so a dam does, it by its nature actually often cause take because it delays fish in getting to their spawning grounds. Fish ladder gets a lot of the fish upstream towards their spawning ground, but those fish after they spawn still have to return downstream. And downstream mortality is probably the major cause of the demise of the salmon. We have an 800 or 900 foot dam on the other side of the building here. There's several turbines in it, very large turbines, and the only way for fish to get through those turbines in this dam, which is particularly egregious, is an 18-inch hole, an 18-inch round hole in a 900-foot dam sandwiched between 3 turbines. So you know what Russian roulette is, right? There's one bullet in out of 6 chambers. In this case, we've got 5 chambers full of bullets and 1 empty. So I'd say not lightly, it's sort of hydroelectric holocaust. And I say that because we're wiping out critical species. 60% of our species overall live in the areas by the river or in the river. So when we wipe out that lifeline, it's like wiping out an artery, blocking an artery. And what happens when we do that? We die.
So far as I'm aware, the companies that own these turbines were silent yesterday, no comment. And by the way, we're open to airing anything they might want to say about this, but they had nothing to say. Have you had any conversation, any discussions with the companies, and what is your understanding of their position?
Well, it's been a position of delay for many years. First off, not acknowledging the problem, finally acknowledging, yes, there is a problem. In fact, some of their own studies speak to the problem. But these are multi-billion-dollar companies that have a hard time investing money into this. We've actually sat in negotiations with them. In fact, in any of these major lawsuits, there's some required mediation, settlement conferences, things like that, and those have all fallen apart in this case.
Let me just go back to the roots of this for a moment. You state in a press release or some kind of document that is on your site that I'm looking at right now that Atlantic salmon in the Merrymeeting Bay watershed and Gulf of Maine are on the verge of extinction. Extinction is quite a charged word. How precisely do we know that they're on the verge of extinction?
Because of the fishway here, we're able to, and fishways at other dams, we're actually able to count the number of returning adult Atlantic salmon each year. And those returns have steadily gone down and down and down. Commercial fisheries that used to exist for Atlantic salmon have disappeared because they're not catching any out in the Gulf. So when we're talking about extinction, last year we had one Atlantic salmon come back up through Brunswick.
Just one?
Just one. If that's not getting close to extinction from a population that used to number in the hundreds of thousands, I don't know what is.
Ed, you're saying that your group and also Environmental Maine are claiming that the turbines, the electricity that's generated by those turbines is pretty insignificant. Does that power go back on the grid for Maine, or is it just the local businesses that may be benefiting from that? And, if it's insignificant, why would they even spend the money to build a turbine like that in the first place?
Well, they're selling all the power they make.
Mm-hmm.
It's only, what we're talking about in the period of time we propose for a shutdown, it's a tenth of 1%. But all of the power they make is being sold onto the open market. It's not necessarily powering the station here, but it's going to Massachusetts. In fact, Maine produces, I think, something like twice the power that we actually use. So we are a net exporter of power, and because we use so much hydro is a good percentage of that.
And again, pardon my density, but I'm trying to wrap my head around how a federal agency, with these turbines are built, they have to go through the federal agency to the environmental protection and wildlife people. How is it that this slipped through the cracks, that they had a fish ladder going one way but nothing going the other way to protect this species? Who didn't know that?
Well, let's be clear. We have an 18-inch hole going the other way.
And that was sufficient for them? That was the studies were done that one 18-inch hole would be sufficient for the entire Atlantic salmon population?
I can't speak to the studies that were done at the time, but it is difficult to and it's become increasingly difficult to get the federal wildlife agencies to be proactive on these issues. Just like many people, and myself included, would say that Monsanto probably runs the FDA, the energy companies tend to have undue influence at FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is the agency that licenses dams and other power producers.
Give us an idea, Ed, of the time frame here. You, on Friday, again, submitted a 60-day notice of intent to sue 3 dam owners. This is going to take a while, right?
Thursday, we filed a motion for a preliminary injunction. That's part of an ongoing lawsuit process that we've had going. So a preliminary injunction is essentially the same as a restraining order. So it's demanding more rapid action from the court, in this case a federal judge. So we've had an ongoing suit. That is a lengthy process. What will happen in the injunction process is, what we've said is, the problem is so egregious that we need a judge to step in before a trial happens and say, stop this for now. When you do that, because you're sort of delaying that trial process and you're getting something major in return, the burden is more on the plaintiff, that is on us, to prove our point that they are causing irreparable harm and several other things, and that the balance of what we're asking for is more of a benefit to the public than a drawback. So what will happen is the defendants, Brookfield, some division of Brookfield, now owns the dams, even though Florida Power, Light and Energy still are the operators. They have until April 4th to respond to our motion for an injunction. The judge will then take that into consideration, and we'll schedule some oral arguments, or we'll make a decision, and we hope before the end of April, which is getting to the time where the outgoing salmon smolt that are anywhere from a year to 3 years old will out-migrate. And part of why we're doing this now is that 2 years ago we actually had a pretty good return, a record return for recent years, which was only about 20 fish, I think. It might have been 20 to 40 fish, I can't remember. So the more fish there are, the more genetic diversity, the more important it is that offspring from those fish get back out to the ocean.
So you're expecting a decision in a month or so?
Correct.
You've got a history of doing this. What's your success rate on suing either the federal or the state governments to protect the ecosystem here in Merrymeeting Bay?
Well, we were successful in listing the salmon in the first place on the Androscoggin and the Kennebec Rivers, and as Penobscot as well. So we have also basically, even if we don't win a lawsuit, we have been largely responsible for pushing the envelope and making things happen. Without this pressure, nothing would be happening.
Corporate America, they've got more money than brains. What are you expecting for a blowback on this from these power companies and the holders of these turbines?
Well, if you read our submissions, our motion, we provide really excellent arguments. We're using a lot of company data. We're using a lot of government data. Those are all the data we're using to support our argument. So what we're really hoping is that the judge can read and will read our submissions. If you go by what we've written, we win on paper.
Mm-hmm. Now, how can folks get in touch with you, or how do they get involved with Friends of Merrymeeting Bay?
Well, Friends of Merrymeeting, this is a piece of what Friends of Merrymeeting Bay does, as we didn't say, but if we go outside here to the Androscoggin, at this dam, from everything downstream is tidewater. It goes out in a few miles to the bay. The bay is at the junction of the Kennebec and the Androscoggin Rivers, as well as 4 smaller rivers. Bay drains close to 40% of all the water in Maine. And it drains through a very narrow slot in the bedrock called the Chops. It's a couple hundred meters across. So it's a unique body of water. You can get in touch with me, phone number 666-3372, or through the Friends of Merrymeeting Bay website, friendsofmerrymeetingbay.org.
We've been speaking with Ed Friedman. He's the chairman of Friends of Merrymeeting Bay, just one of 2 environmental groups who have petitioned a federal judge to order the temporary shutdown of turbines at 4 hydroelectric dams here on the Kennebec and the Androscoggin Rivers this spring to protect the migrating Atlantic salmon.
Ed, many thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Richard. My pleasure.
We'll do it again. Radio 9 WCME.